Welcome back, America. We continue our conversation with one of the most important voices in education. He's not only served as the Education Commissioner and Lieutenant Governor of the great state of Florida, but most recently as the Assistant Secretary of Education for Elementary and Secondary Education here in Washington with the Trump administration. That's a really important job. Joining us right now is Frank Brogan. Great to have you here, Mr. Secretary.
John, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be with everyone. Thank you.
It's a great honor to have you on. You have this great, rich history of both doing things at the state level, at the federal level. I want to ask you about something, because I've been in Washington about 30 years now. I feel for the first time there's a really significant shift in how Americans view the Department of Education. Am I misreading that?
No, I don't think so at all. I think it really is reflective of what's going on across the nation right now, where people are beginning to work more with their eyes wide open, especially parents who are now starting to look not only at their own local systems, their own state operation, but more than ever before, how the federal government interfaces with local education.
Yeah, it really is remarkable. There is this, I think, was this, or I should say, that most Americans say, well, the education department, what writes the big ticket for everybody in this country? But actually, you and I were talking offline. It's fascinating. What is the percentage that the federal government actually contributes towards each school district's basic funding?
Yeah, it's really surprising to people, and I understand why, but it's somewhere between 9 and 10% of federal money goes to the state and local level. And many people believe that the federal government provides a large amount of money. I'm not saying 9 or 10% isn't large, but the bottom line is it's not what people believe it is, and it doesn't go as far as people believe it is to go. And yet, the federal government typically treats that 9% as though it buys them a controlling interest at the local level in how people operate, what rules, regulations they have to follow, and how the operation is handled in that regard.
Yeah, the disconnect between the size of the funding and the amount of authority that has come with it is really remarkable. There have been some members of Congress come on my show recently and say, listen, we're going to start looking at maybe downsizing the education department, getting rid of it. You were of that thinking a long time ago. I think people are starting to catch up to your thoughts. How real is that conversation, and what sort of serious work has to happen in order for changes like that to begin to be effected?
Well, it's going to take a lot of courage on people's part. But back to where you started, there are many people, not just me, but many people who have long believed that something that started out very, very small, the federal issue of control of education in the country, has blossomed, bloomed, and grown beyond anyone's wildest imagination, not only in K through 12 education, but in higher education as well. Right. And by virtue of that fact, more and more people, and you said it, that includes important people in the legislative process, are starting to believe what many of us believed for a long time, which is we really need to reduce the role, especially the role in policy and dictate that goes along with the relationship with the federal government and people at the state and local levels education process.
Yeah, such an important conversation. It's one we didn't have for a long time. It seems like the pandemic, in an odd way, opened up parents' eyes, particularly, but all of our eyes, to what had been going on, what transformations had been going on in the school system. And now today, people say, hey, after what I saw, I want more transparency, more insight to what's going on in my children, my grandchildren's learning. How epic has that shift been? It seems to be a pretty seismic shift.
It is the shot heard round the world, and it's very exciting that parents who have been very supportive of education, and especially their children's education, have now begun to open their eyes and recognize that all they believed it was meant and supposed to be is not really the way it is. In many places, disruptions to the education process with activities that have shocked, really, truly shocked parents regarding the education of their children, what's being offered, how it's being offered, what's required to be offered. And so much of it, which has grown laterally, are issues that really are not what parents believed we were in the business of doing, which is basically teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic. That we have moved completely away from a great deal of that in places across the country. And now we're dealing with issues that no one ever believed possible in elementary school, middle school, and high school. But the good news is we have roused parents to the point where they're now clearer on what is taking place and greater partners in making sure that we can get this thing back to the point where what is the most important component is what we handle every day. And that is making sure our children get a quality educational experience in a safe and disciplined environment, and assure our children that if they do their part in this thing, they will go on to be able to do great things later on.
Yeah. Prepare them for life. That's what the system was always designed to be. Sarah, we got about a minute left. I want to ask about this. There are so many amazing things going on in Florida. And when you talk to people, people say, Florida, that's the example. Florida, that's the example. What do you think are some of the most important lessons and initiatives in Florida that other states can learn from?
Well, it wasn't that very long ago in Florida where there were no standards for education in the different courses and opportunities for children. It was whatever anybody wanted to do. And in many places, that wasn't much. It is also important to recognize that accountability in education is critical. We have to make certain that our children are working at a level that they deserve to inherit, instead of working at the tail end. And indeed, across the country, people are now starting to raise their educational standards because they recognize so many of our children have fallen further behind. And as you know, John, the pandemic made that even worse. And so now people are starting to understand. And I have believed this for a long time. We go to school 180 days. We've gone to school 180 days for decades, and yet our children are falling farther and farther behind. It's pivotal that we recognize that more time on task is essential. If that means a longer school year, then we should expand that school year to see to it that children are learning what they need to learn and in amounts that will serve them well once they leave the educational process. That is a controversial issue. People still believe, and many parents still believe, 180 days is enough. It isn't enough anymore. We have so much to teach and they so much to learn that additional time on task, I have always believed, is really become a hallmark of how we need to handle education in the future.
Well, and one of the things we've all come to appreciate is failure is not an option in this particular mission that we have in the great country of America. Sir, it's a great honor. I want to thank you for your service, all the work you've done as an education secretary, as a lieutenant governor, and then, of course, in the Trump administration, the education department. Your service, your insights are greatly appreciated. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you, John. And my favorite job of all time was when I was a 5th grade teacher. Loved every minute of it.
That's the best one of all. Great honor to have you on, sir. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks.
All right, folks, we're going to hit a quick commercial break. But before we head off, I want to take a quick moment to show you the latest advertisement produced by our sponsor, Heritage Action for America. Take a look at this. We'll be right back.
The greatest threat to our national security is the debt.
America's poor and middle class have been ravaged by this pattern and practice of abuse.
It's because politicians in Washington cannot stop spending money that we don't have.
We can balance the budget. Our states do it. Countries do it.
Republican majority in the House will not vote to raise the debt ceiling without significant budget reform.
We need to attach to it fiscal controls or other spending cuts. The numbers always rule in the long run.
It's got to be different. It has to be, because the consequences of staying on the same course are too devastating for us to contemplate.
The debt limit is actually the tool for the American people to put Congress in check.